Hello, my name is Robbie. On here, I'm Templar Knight. Every person who believes in God but does not attend a church has a story why. But it's said that whenever two or more people gather in God's name, that He is there. So this is church. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. Tonight, we are continuing the Fearless series, the story of King David. Last week, we left off. He is finally king. King Saul has passed on. King Ishbosheth was killed. The Israelites have now turned to David and declared him to be the king. So what does that mean for David? Well, he's now the king of Israel, and Israel essentially was 12 tribes. 12 different groups of people that King Saul brought together to form one nation. And Saul, he was from the tribe of Benjamin, so he made the capital. It was in Gibeah, which that's where he was from. But David's not from the tribe of Benjamin. David is from the tribe of Judah. So if David were to leave the capital in Gibeah, it would basically be him saying that, okay, the Benjamites are still the first and foremost of all the tribes. But if he moves the capital to Bethlehem, his hometown, or if he moves the capital to Hebron, which is the largest city from his tribe, then he's saying that now the Judeans are the first and foremost, that they are the highest tribe. So he's got this problem. See, Saul was the first king. How does David establish this as one nation and break down these tribes so that they're no longer squabbling amongst themselves, that they can all be one? Well, to do this, he needs a new capital. Not a capital that belongs to any of the tribes. And he needs a capital that is worthy of leading God's nation. And there's only one place that would suit the bill for that. And it is an impregnable stronghold that's called Jebus. But there's only one problem with it. Jebus is controlled by the pagan Jebusites. And it is such a strong and formidable fortress that they often brag that even their lame and their blind could hold the walls of Jebus against any army. Well, we'll see about that. So David, he gathers his army. Not just his Gibberine. He's now the king of Israel. He gathers the army of Israel. And he goes to Jebus. And he sounds his war horn to let them know that Israel has come. And the sound brings the Jebusites to the walls. And they look down, and they are not as worried as they should be to see the army of Israel. Because no one can attack their city. No one has been able to break through their tall, strong walls. But they've never gone against David. David quickly comes up with a plan. And he comes up with a strategy to send a select group from his Gibberine to go through the city's water system and infiltrate the walls, open the gates, and let the army in. So when the sun went down, the city belonged to the Jebusites. But when the sun came up, the city belonged to Israel. The city belonged to David. So the first thing he does, he casts out all the Jebusites and he claims their city in the name of the Lord. Now Israel has a capital that is not a part of any one tribe. It belongs to all the tribes. And he renames it Jerusalem, the city of David. In doing so, David secured all 12 tribes under one nation, under one capital, under one flag. And so David has proven himself to be a great political leader. And as Jerusalem is declared the capital, it didn't take long for the Philistines to figure out what was going on. See, when David was a child, he killed their champion. Then David had tricked them, faking insanity to escape when they had him captured. Then David lied to them about raiding Israel when he was actually raiding the Amalekites and protecting the people he was supposed to be raiding. And now they find out that David has left Philistine. He has left Ziklag. And he is now the king of the Philistines' biggest rivals. King Achish is, let's just say he's not real happy about this. The more I think about it, David's kind of got a thing with pissing off kings. So, Achish he's grumpy pants about this. He's big mad. And he decides, he's going to do something about this. He's going to get David and teach him a lesson. So in his fury, he gathers up the Philistine army, and he marches into Israel. Now, mind you, the Philistine army, they always have had military dominance over Israel, except when David's in the mix. They've had the bigger army, they've had the better gear, the better armor. But David has God. So the Philistines, they set up in the valley of Rephaim, which is not all that far from the new capital of Jerusalem. He brought so many men with him that the camp spans the entire valley. Well, obviously, David cannot let this Philistine army invade his land, so he gathers the army of Israel, and he goes to meet them. Now, the last time David was with the Israeli army, he was just a general. Well, now he's the king. And all of his generals, they're trying to prove something to him, so they all want to guide him on how to win. Well, if we position to the east and we attack when the sun comes up. No, we go to the west. We attack when the sun falls. We should split our forces and flank them. David listens to all of his generals. He doesn't care about anything they have to say. He goes and he prays. And he talks to God. Because David knows that God has always been his best ally on any battlefield. And God tells David how to lead this attack. God tells him, you take your smaller force with inferior weapons and armor, and you attack them head on, straight up the middle. Okay, God. So David goes back and he tells his generals, and they are not really keen on this. My king, that's not a battle plan. That's suicide. That is a horrible plan. And David, not having any of it. That is what the Lord has told me to do. Was it not a horrible plan when God sent a 14-year-old boy to fight a giant? You all know how that turned out. God's plan does not have to make sense to us, but we will follow God's plan without question. This is not a discussion. So when morning comes, they sound the horn. and the army of Israel goes to war, rushing straight up the middle as God commanded. And they crushed the Philistines. They dealt such a defeat, the Philistines fled, scattering all the way back to Gath like whipped dogs. King Achish is, he's furious. He does not understand how he could have possibly lost that fight. And now he figures, I know what David's plan of attack will be. Let's go back and do it again. This time, we'll leave the middle weak. When he charges, we will open and let him in. And then once he has passed our line, we will collapse in on him and crush him. So Achish gathers more troops, gathers more men, goes right back to the Valley of Rephaim again. David hears of this. He's like, seriously, guys? We just did this. All right, gather the troops. And so they ride out again. And David's generals, well, let's say they've got a newfound faith in their leader. And they are all excited. Oh, yeah. Straight up the middle. Let's get this. Let's go. We got this. And David's like, no. God has given me a new plan. This time we shall divide our forces. Half of you shall ride around to the far side of them. And when you hear the wind shuffling through the trees, that will be God sounding the attack. And so they split forces, and they rode. And they waited. And when they heard the wind blowing through the trees, they attacked. And again, the Philistines were crushed. They were routed and were attacked the entire way, retreating all the way back to Gath. Because David had proven what a great military leader he was. David had proven what a great military leader God was. Because all he had to do was listen and trust that God would give him the victory. So with the Philistines put back in their place, Jerusalem grows. King David and his family grows. And mind you, David, he's got a handful of wives now, and a decent amount of children. Back in the day, the Bronze Era, polygamy was common amongst kings. Anyone who could support and defend their wives would often have multiple, and David did. David even got his first wife, Michal, back. She was returned to him. Now, those of you remember, last time he saw her, she made a mannequin and lied to the guards that David was sick so that he could escape. Well, when she was brought before her father, he wasn't all that happy with her. So, to insult David, he gave her to another man. And for the last 10 years, she's been with this other guy. Surprisingly enough, she learned to love him, and she was happy there. In all reality, she probably would have loved to have just stayed there and live out the rest of her days. But she belonged to David. And so she was brought back against her will. And she joined David's other wives and watched them raise David's children. and David's family grew. Now, David realized that for Jerusalem to truly become the city that God intended it to be, it needed something. David needed to go and fetch the Ark of the Covenant and bring it to Jerusalem. The Ark, it's been in a tabernacle at Bala, and it was time to bring it home. So David organized an expedition to fetch it. Now, if you're not familiar with this, the Ark of the Covenant, it's a golden chest, essentially. Inside of it, it has a golden jar of manna, and that was the sustenance that God gave Moses when he freed the slaves and they went through the desert. It has Aaron's rod. Aaron was Moses' assistant, his right-hand man. It has the 10 Commandments. But most importantly, inside that ark is the presence of God, or at least as close as we can get here on earth. The ark is pure gold, and no one can open it. No one can even touch it. So they have poles attached to it so they can pick it up and that priests can carry it. This is the most important religious relic right now. And David needs it in Jerusalem. So he sends forth to get it. And he takes a Philistine ox cart to bring it back. You know, it's the same type of cart he was using to transport all of his stolen loot back when he was a mercenary. That's how you transport treasure nowadays. That's the way things are. So he takes his big parade and his priests and some musicians, and they go to get the ark. They put it on the ox cart, they take down the tabernacle, they take down the tents, and they're bringing it back. But that is not how God intended the ark to be moved. So the procession was leading back to Jerusalem with musicians and singers and celebration. But the ark is supposed to be carried on the shoulders of priests, not an ox cart. And during the trip, while going over some bumps, because wheels deal with bumps differently than people do, one of the ox stumbled, and a man who was nearby, he meant well. He reached out to try and support the ark so that it wouldn't fall and potentially get in the mud. And as he reached out to try and brace it, he was struck dead instantly on the spot. Everybody stops. The whole procession, the music stops, and was like, dude, what just happened? Now, David is confused because he thought he was doing the right thing. But clearly, he had done something to anger God. So he looks around and they see this farmhouse of the man whose land they're on. They go up to him. This man's named Obed-Edom. And David talks to him and says, hey, so the Ark of the Covenant is going to be staying here for a while. I hope you don't mind. And while he's explaining this to Obed-Edom and his family, the priests are setting up the tabernacle. They're setting up the tents. And there's not a whole lot Obed-Edom can do. So he does as his king commands. And David goes back to Jerusalem, leaving the ark behind. He gets back to Jerusalem and he's just kind of bummed. He's defeated. So he spends time in prayer, spends time with his priests, spends time with his prophets. And he finally realized what he had done wrong. He's a little fearful, so he sends a scout out. He says, hey, go check on Obed-Edom. Make sure everything's okay over there. Because I'm sure David's a little worried. He just upset God. God offed one of his people because he tried to support the ark. And now they just left this power, all of this force, this presence that is contained inside the ark. They just left it with this farmer. And all the priests and the prophets are there too, to constantly praise and worship, but it's just here now. And when the scouts return, they are exhilarated and bursting with joy. My king, in the 3 months since we left, the land we left behind is flourishing. All around there is drought, but Obed-Edom's crops are nourished and green. His granaries are bursting. His grapes are more plump than any I have seen. His cows and goats have more milk than anyone can consume. And his wife is pregnant with twins. God has truly blessed this man. David is inspired by what he has heard. And he knows now where he went wrong. And so he goes forth again to get the ark. And this time, he plans to do it the right way. He plans to do it God's way. So he makes the proper sacrifices, and he brings the priests to carry the ark. And as he brings the ark back to Jerusalem, transporting it the way God had intended, on the shoulders of priests, the horn sounds to tell the whole city that they have arrived, and the people gather. And as they come through the gates, David looks at all the people. He looks at his capital, his Jerusalem, and he knows the blessings the ark will bring. He is overwhelmed with joy and excitement, being overcome with this love and joy, grace of the Lord. David dances. David praises. David worships his Lord. And seeing their king's passion for God, the people join him, and the party of the century begins. They bring out food and drink, given out to everyone who is there. David removes his kingly garments, and the celebration goes on. All around are rejoicing in God's presence, for the ark is home, where it belongs. David has founded the capital of God's nation in Jerusalem. He has conquered the enemies of Israel. And now he has brought the ark home. Truly a cause for celebration. And so he parties with his people long into the night until the morning comes. And what a celebration it must have been. When I think of the joy that they experienced. I too wish I could dance like David danced. Because when I'm overwhelmed, I cry. And when David is overwhelmed, he worships. So, as the party of the century comes to an end, David returns home to his palace, where he is met by his first wife, Michal. And she's upset and scornful. Look at my fool of a husband, dancing in the streets in his undergarments like some filthy pervert. David standing there in his sweat-soaked undertunic, carrying his royal robes over his shoulder like a teenager returning late home from prom. But he is not going to let this woman ruin his mood. And he lashes back at her. In God's presence, I will dance all that I want to. The Lord chose me over your father, and he has set me to rule over his people. So I will dance to celebrate his glory. If that is how the Spirit moves me, and I will proudly make a fool of myself, and I will praise him with no inhibition. I may be a king, and I should act as a king does. But I am first and always a child of God, and I will never be too ashamed to worship my Lord. And so David retired, leaving her standing there, never to seek her comfort again. If only Michal would have seen her husband's act of worship and celebrated with him. If only she had greeted him saying, I saw you dance for the Lord today, and I am proud of you and your act of worship. If only she had not been such a bitter woman, hurt by the loss of her father, angry over a marriage she had been taken from and a false husband whom she loved. If only she had been able to find joy in her marriage with David. If only she had loved David the way she did when they were young. Then maybe, just maybe, we never would have had to learn about the name Bathsheba.